Hey, welcome to the Don't Sleep on Stress presentation. My name is Brianna Savage. I'm a doctoral intern at the Counseling Center. So, to provide a bit of an understanding of what this presentation is, it is a discussion about physical and mental health, how they work together, and going through some themes about how physical and mental health can impact stress levels, and then ways to manage that stress and your mental health. So this presentation is going to cover some areas that are related to the impacts of um, physical and mental health. Would you like an activity? Just kind of like to think about like some of these areas of like integration. We'll talk about nutrition, caffeine, exercise, movement, energy, some sleep. We'll also address burnout, and then we'll do another like, activity about progressive muscle relaxation and mindfulness to kind of show a way that you can integrate taking care of like your physical and mental health. So the first kind of part about this is like the impact of how physical health can affect your mental health. And it can affect many more areas, but these are some of like the spaces where we see pretty significant impacts. So one of them being concentration and attention. You might notice that, like, for example, if you're more tired or if you're more stressed out, that it's harder to like pay attention, keep your attention on one thing, hard to stay focused. Kind of similar like motivation. You may notice that like it's harder to just complete tasks or to feel like you're interested in doing something or to get something started. Um, and sometimes that can be related to like your physical health. Vice versa, like your mental health can also have impacts on your physical health as well. So like if you're not feeling motivated or ready to like say like exercise or something, then it's gonna of course like impact your physical health. Um, Fatigue is another big one where physical and mental health are like kind of working together. As well as like mood and relationships. So you might find that if your physical health is like not being taken care of, that you might find yourself with a lower mood, or you might be like more irritable, and sometimes that can affect relationships. Like maybe you don't spend as much time with people, or it's difficult to spend time with people. Um, Another area of this is that can be affected is also like substance use. So because of like stress or any kind of worry or something, you might use more substances to cope with that. And you might notice that that isn't necessarily helpful for like your physical health. Or the other way around, if you're like using more substances and stuff, you might notice that your mental health takes a little bit of a toll. So we're going to unpack like these a little bit deeper, but before we get into that, um, think about like some of these areas and how they like relate to you and like your peers. So in terms of like caffeine, for example, think about like maybe like how much coffee you drink, how much coffee you think your peers drink, how much is basically enough caffeine. Um, and then similarly, kind of think of this in the same area as like sleep. So think of like how much sleep you believe is like necessary for you to feel rested. Um, and then how much sleep do you actually get typically? Um, and think of things that like get in the way of being able to get the sleep that you want. Um, for exercise, think of like if you or your peers, if you do exercise regularly, what is regular exercise to you? And other things that can kind of get in the way of exercise. And then for nutrition, do you ever like pay attention to nutrition? Have you ever felt concerned about like your nutrition levels or wondered about how you can learn more regarding like your nutrition, um, and those kinds of things. So take a minute to think about that. And just as like some more like general discussion and stuff, for caffeine consumption, usually people drink about 4 cups a day is like kind of like the average. Obviously, there's probably a bit of a range to that in terms of like what feels like enough for you. Um, For sleep, sometimes the things that can get in the way of sleep are like, you know, trying to find time and balancing that with like responsibilities. Sometimes, like, we have so much going on that it's harder to just stop and rest and relax. And so sometimes like we push through feeling tired in order to get other things done. Or we might find that even though maybe like some work is done, it's just hard to rest. It's hard to feel rested. It's hard to get into that space at night. So even if you're tired, sometimes it's harder to fall asleep. Um, Kind of similar, but like exercise too. Like a lot of times when we're busy, one of the first things that we um, don't pay much attention to is like exercise and movement because it does take additional time, and sometimes it's really hard to find that time. um, Also, it's hard to, it can be tough to find exercise that you enjoy. Sometimes exercise just feels like more work, and most of us don't want more work. Um, and it can also be tough to access it depending on the type of exercise that you do want to do. Like, for example, if you enjoy walking, but you don't live in a place that's very walkable, or if the weather isn't favorable, it gets in the way of being able to do that. Nutrition, sometimes because even that can take a lot of time of thinking of cooking or meal planning. Um, it can be easier to find like, quicker food, quicker meals. And sometimes we just don't even think about if it's enough like for what we need for our nutrition levels, or even knowing like what kind of nutrition levels we should be paying attention to. Um, so we're going to unpack those areas a little bit more. Let's see. So let's start with nutrition. So there's a lot of different ways and areas that nutrition levels can affect your mental health and your mood. So let's start with this inflammation and depression, which is a pretty simplified way of talking about this. But inflammation is something that happens typically like when we're sick or when we're in pain. It's like a signal to our body that like we need some sort of healing. And so a lot of times, like when we have like more inflammation and stuff, it makes us feel like we need to rest more. And so when that happens and stuff, it can be kind of similar to depression, or just like things that are like similar to depression, not necessarily like a diagnosis of it, but just other stuff that's kind of like similar. So like maybe feeling a little bit lower, feeling more tired and fatigued, um, feeling withdrawn from other people. It's because you're like, your body is saying like, we need to rest and recover, even though maybe you're not necessarily like sick or like physically in pain or hurting or anything. So how is it that like nutrition affects this area? Um, the foods that we eat can contain things that like increase inflammation in our bodies. So two of the primary things being like sugar and salt. So um, more in excess of sugar or in excess of salt can influence how much inflammation we have. And so if you have these things like in excess or too much of it, then you might your body might react in terms of like having more inflammation, which is going to bring in these rest behaviors that start to pull back on like your energy resources. So because you're resting, it's harder to devote the energy to getting something done, or to, feeling like you're appropriately rested or anything like that. And that can kind of contribute to how like you're feeling in terms of stress, because it's kind of like that feeling of like, I have things to do and I can't get it done, but I don't entirely know why. So sometimes that can be related to the food that you're eating. Similarly, caffeine. So caffeine is a stimulant, and it can also like lead to withdrawal as well. But it can also contribute to like fatigue and to anxiety levels. So you might notice if you're somebody who regularly like drinks like any kind of caffeine, that sometimes it takes more caffeine to have an effect to make you feel like you're more awake and more alert. Um, And then kind of similarly for somebody who's like in a period of high stress or if you're anxious, that caffeine, because it is a stimulant, can make you feel more activated. It can make you feel more um, like more worried, more of like the physical symptoms of like anxiousness and stress. So like maybe like your hands are shaking or you feel really restless. Some people get headaches. You might feel like your mind is just racing. And sometimes that can be related to too high of a caffeine intake. So what can be helpful about like caffeine in your relationship with caffeine is knowing your own tolerance levels and also being mindful of like what happens to you when you have too much caffeine. And because that's kind of not complicated, but a little bit more involved, there's another portion where we'll talk a bit more about caffeine and like how to actively do that, um, and to just kind of take care of that part of you. Um, and then I also wanted to talk about like, dehydration. So when you're dehydrated, you might notice that it can affect like your mood and like your cognitive performance because your body is not getting the resources like that it needs. It's kind of like kind of similar to the inflammation and stuff where it's kind of like your body is more in a restful state because it has to devote more energy to one other system and stuff. It's harder for it to like keep flowing. Most of the time we turn to caffeine when we're tired and we don't really think about like water. But it does actually make a pretty big difference. So something that you might notice if you're dehydrated is that it's harder to focus. It's harder for like your memory, um, those kinds of things. And then hunger. You've probably heard like the advertisements and the jokes and stuff of like you're not you when you're hungry. That's kind of true. Um, when you're hungry, your attention is more focused on food and on eating and not being hungry. And so you might notice that like it has some negative impacts like on your moods or your relationships because um, most of us just aren't feeling happy when we're hungry. So we might be more irritable um, until you're like able to have something to eat. And again, like if you're more focused on the fact that you need to eat, it's harder to pay attention. So that's another area where sometimes we just kind of like push it off in an effort to like finish whatever we're doing. So, we'll all have dinner after I finish writing this paper or after I finish this assignment or whatever. But sometimes that can make completing that task worse because it's just harder to devote like your headspace to actually doing it because your mind is focused on refueling basically and re-energizing through food. Um, so all that to say some basic takeaways of this for like improving nutrition. It sounds a little cliche, but drinking more water just to make sure that your body is appropriately hydrated and that everything is like, flowing as effectively as it can through your body. That can also help, the hydration can also help mitigate some of the bigger effects of like the caffeine, the salt, and the sugar by kind of creating more balance in your body. Um, Paying attention to sugar, salt, and processed foods. So I'm not saying that like never have these things, but just be aware of the effect that it could be having on you. It's something that you can kind of play around with and see like, is it having an effect by like maybe just trying to have a little bit less sugar or less salt or like less fast food or something and just see how you feel. And it seems kind of obvious, but eat when you're hungry. Um, it doesn't really do you much good to not pay attention to your body when it's telling you that it needs something. And here we have a short video about the brain and caffeine.
Need a coffee jolt to start your day? This wake-up call is courtesy of coffee, a stimulant also found in tea, soda, and energy drinks that increases activity in your brain and nervous system. Caffeine does this by blocking the receptors in the brain for a chemical called adenosine, which turns down the central nervous system so you can fall asleep. Without it, the brain keeps you awake and alert. Caffeine also increases levels of the hormones cortisol and adrenaline. The heart pumps faster, CWC. Because the body absorbs caffeine quickly, its effects typically take 10 or 15 minutes. Caffeine can improve memory and concentration, which may help with work. It can also boost mood and even enhance athletic performance. But too much caffeine can make you sick and cause other unwanted side effects. Headache, upset stomach, irritability, and anxiety. It can also interfere with sleep. Consumed as much as 6 hours before bed. That's why it's a good idea to avoid caffeine in the late afternoon. During pregnancy, caffeine may increase the risk of miscarriage or birth weight. So how much caffeine is safe for adults? Experts say 400 milligrams a day. That's roughly the amount of 4 8-ounce cups of coffee. Some types of coffee can more. During pregnancy, some caffeine 200 milligrams a day. Keep in mind that different sources have different amounts of caffeine. A full energy shot can pack 200 milligrams or more. While soda and chocolate typically contain less caffeine than with the coffee. Caffeine effects vary per person. Those who don't consume much tend to be more sensitive. But heavy users can build up a tolerance. Means when you consume, more caffeine you may need to get back to the
Alright, so I'm thinking about where you are with caffeine and stuff. First of all, it's helpful to know your level of consumption of caffeine before you start trying to reduce the caffeine intake that you have. So it really does depend on just how your body reacts to caffeine. So if you're thinking of reducing your caffeine intake, a place to start could be finding a cutoff time. So trying to stop drinking your caffeine by a certain time of day. So kind of similar to the video, caffeine can linger in the body even 6 hours after you last had it. So sometimes people drink coffee or energy drinks or whatever throughout the day in order to kind of keep feeling energized, but that can have an effect on sleep. So finding a time to cut off when you drink caffeine in relation to when you like to go to sleep can be a good place to start. So for example, if you're trying to fall asleep by 11, you wouldn't want to have any kind of caffeine later than 5 p.m. So just kind of play around with that and you can see where that fits. Kind of similar to finding a cutoff point in terms of how much caffeine you have. So if you're somebody who drinks 4 cups of coffee a day, but you notice that you have trouble sleeping or that you're more irritable or something, or you might feel more stressed, you can think about slowly cutting back on the amount of caffeine that you drink. If you are thinking of cutting back on the amount of caffeine you drink, just be mindful of any potential side effects that you may have, headaches or more irritable and stuff, and just kind of be prepared in the event that that happens to you. Something that can be helpful with that is replacing something with a lower caffeine content. So if you drink, say, energy drinks, you could potentially replace that with coffee or soda, or if you like coffee, considering how much caffeine is in the type of coffee that you drink. So lighter roasts of caffeine have lighter roasts of coffee have higher caffeine intake. So that can potentially be where you might be noticing some of the differences, that it just is a bit too much. Whereas if you have a medium or dark roast coffee, that might make a difference in the amount of caffeine that you're having that is manageable for you. Another common way that you see people replacing their caffeine is by going from say coffee to tea. Just keep in mind that like different teas, just like coffee, different teas have different types of caffeine. So just be aware of how much caffeine you're still consuming with tea. Um, and then consider adding more water. So caffeine dehydrates us. And so that can possibly be contributing to why you feel less like energy throughout the day because you're dehydrated. And then, so maybe rather than reaching for another cup of coffee, it might be helpful to reach for some water. Um, and like it says here, water can be more helpful for having like energy. Um, but now we can kind of talk about like exercise and movement. Um, so I this message isn't really like, oh, do you feel sad? You should go for a walk, which is something that a lot of people hear, but more so just like when we're stationary, it can have a big impact on our mood and how we're feeling. But sometimes when it comes to like exercising and movement, a lot of us think like I should exercise more or I shouldn't sit down as much. But sometimes it can feel kind of hard to know like where to start with that. So just some general thoughts about like moving around and movement in general. Consider like minimizing your sitting down time. Most of us sit down a significant portion of the day, whether it's like class, work, driving, commuting. It just, we sit a lot. And so you see things like, people have like those standing desks, or you might have like, what's it called? You might have like reminders on like a smartwatch to like get some certain amounts of steps per hour or something like that. Um, that's like that light daily movement. So just having some opportunities to move around and get up can make a really big difference. Instead of just like sitting in the same place for hours on end, it can start to feel a little bit tiring or stifling and stuff. It's harder for, again, like our body systems to just be moving if we're sitting a lot. Where you see a lot of this affect you is like, like your blood circulation and your lungs. So kind of getting around and moving helps with that happening. Kind of similar, another thing that can be helpful is like stretching. Like sometimes you can stretch in the morning, throughout the day, or before you go to bed. Just something to kind of help promote the blood flow, but also still getting like some movement in that's not necessarily so demanding or imposing compared to like trying to like suddenly start an exercise routine. Um, but in the spirit of exercise, so I have like some general guidelines from the Mayo Clinic, and they recommend like exercising aerobic exercise about 150 minutes. That's per week. And so aerobic exercise can be anything from like walking, swimming, depending on how rapidly you swim. Um, it might be aerobic. It basically is like something that helps with your blood, your heart rate going up a little bit, and also like increasing oxygen flow is the whole point of like aerobic exercise. And sometimes it's not even necessarily like exercise in terms of like a routine, like I mentioned walking. But another thing that we overlook are like daily activities and how that can actually be exercise. For example, like cleaning. When you're cleaning, depending on the type of thing that you're doing, say like you're vacuuming or something, that is typically an aerobic exercise because you're moving a bit more rigorously than you would like throughout the day, like when you're sitting down or just like walking from a parking lot to a building or something. Um, they also recommend like vigorous exercise for about 75 minutes. That's also per week. So that might be stuff like running. I mentioned swimming for aerobic exercise, but like if you're doing like sprinting in a pool or like endurance swimming or something that would be more vigorous, something that gets your blood pumping or your heart pumping more rapidly than like your regular aerobic exercise and stuff. So um, that can also be helpful just to make sure that your heart is healthy and blood is kind of flowing throughout your body and stuff. That usually helps with the energy level. Uh, Additionally, like kind of discussed before, but like movement throughout the day. So like if you have like an hourly reminder to just get up and walk around for like a minute or two, that can actually go a pretty long way. And then they also recommend strength training twice a week. I didn't say like how much time in that, but I mean, consider it in terms of like your own limits, right? You wouldn't want to just jump in and pick up heavy weights that you never typically are used to holding, and then pushing yourself past the point that is tolerable. So just kind of within your own tolerance levels, best to like consult with a professional who can help you guide you through that if you're like considering it. But in terms of like why exercise is so helpful and important for like our mood and for our energy, when we exercise, we release endorphins. It's a hormone that just makes you feel good and makes you feel better. And it can be useful as well in terms of like energy because it kind of helps us get out some of like that energy that we have throughout the day, which helps us sleep better at night and it can help us feel more rested as well. So um, exercise is one of those things that when I was talking about it a little bit earlier, is that can be hard to like find time or to find something that's enjoyable. You don't have to go for a run if you don't like running. Sometimes finding the best type of like exercise is just finding what feels good for you and finding what's enjoyable. So if it's yoga, if it's running, if it's riding a bike, if it's swimming, if it's walking or whatever, just try out a few different things and like see what sticks. Some people like exercising with equipment, some people like exercising with like weights and stuff. It just, whatever kind of fits you, whatever kind of works for you. If it's enjoyable, it doesn't feel like it's as much work. And then sleep, because we're like in the spirit of like energy and exercise and all that. So some general guidelines about sleep, um, routine, relaxation, and restorative. So we'll go into a little bit more detail about like this first point in a moment, but like having a routine um, daily to kind of get your body used to when you're getting ready to go to bed is really helpful in helping you wind down, helping your brain wind down and know that it's time for sleep. Um, Similarly, like relaxation, so like not doing anything that's too like that demands so much of your mind before trying to sleep is really helpful. A lot of times, what makes it hard to go to sleep is that we feel like our minds are just going all over the place, and that it's harder to feel like relaxed and like we're able to rest. And then restore. So like sleep is restoring us, right? It's restoring our bodies, it's restoring our minds. And so paying attention to sleep is an important area of like knowing just like how to recover. It's considered like recovering from the day almost. But in consideration of like sleep being restorative, something that we talk about a lot and that you might hear a lot is like this idea of like say you're really busy throughout the week, it's finally the weekend and you're going to sleep in and like catch up on sleep. um Catching up on sleep is a myth, and when it's gone, it's gone. Like you can't backtrack restoration. So that's kind of why it's more helpful to make sure you establish it as like a daily thing or something to the best that you can. I mean, life happens, right? But like trying to do the best that you can to make sure that each night that you sleep just feels more restful. Um, we've already kind of talked about like fatigue and the impacts that fatigue can have, like when you're to your energy levels when you're stressed and stuff, and sometimes it can feel tough to rest even when we're tired. So again, like it's important to pay attention to like your body cues and everything, but also in recognition of like even when you're trying your best, it can be tough to like get into that space where you can sleep. And we'll talk about that a little bit more like in an upcoming slide about like how you can honor what your body is telling you in order to sleep. And then just something else to consider is like what sleep deprivation does to the brain. So sleep deprivation can, it's another thing that can really affect mood. You might find that you're just in a lower mood, that you just don't really feel as like interested in things. You might notice that you might feel more sad, or just more disinterested, really. Can also like make you feel more irritable. So you're not as patient about things that maybe you ordinarily would have been. It's also really hard to concentrate when you're tired. And so it can affect like work performance and school performance. And it's one of those things that can be easy to forget about in the day to day, but it can have such a big impact on just like how we're doing and how we're functioning. And like in consideration of that too, thinking about like burnout. So burnout is essentially like when our mind is overworked and we're less motivated and interested in doing something, even stuff that we like or stuff that we're good at. It it's kind of like that feeling of like I don't want to go and do that thing again. And so it just can feel very like feel maybe like defeating or very irritating to do it. And so sometimes it can feel like, well, I don't want to do anything at all. So one of the signs, like most noticeable signs of burnout, is when you just feel more tired, especially when you feel more tired even thinking about that thing, whatever it is. Um, and so you might feel like more mentally and physically tired. Um, and so like ways to like just kind of notice the burnout and take care of the burnout is to notice like if like your basic functioning is starting to be harder to do or is not working as well as it usually is. So like sleep, eating, um, moving around. For burnout, it can be helpful to kind of like lighten your load a bit. Just like in the other stuff that we've talked about and about like sleep and stuff, it's harder to do these things if you're not fully like functioning yourself. Um, and so sometimes it can be more helpful to like lighten what you're doing because again, like life happens. Sometimes there are things that we have to get done, and sometimes those deadlines don't line up with where we're feeling mentally. But like the work's going to be there. So sometimes maybe instead of like saying you're going to sit down and do work for 3 hours, it might be more helpful and realistic to say I'm going to do work for an hour, take a break for a bit, and then go back to it. It's still a way of getting work done without being overly demanding, especially when you're feeling more tired. And then self-care too is something that we tend to overlook a lot, but it's pretty helpful in being able to manage like any type of like burnout feelings. So thinking of self-care in terms of like feeling more rested, doing stuff that you enjoy, um, spending time with people that you like, talking to people that you like, watching a video, watching a show. There's all different kinds of things. I mean, self-care looks different for everybody. It's not always just like bath bombs and candles. It can be exercise, it can be drinking water. So just thinking of different ways to just make sure that you're taking care of yourself.
Sleep is essential. You can't function or survive without it. While your body is resting, your brain is a fluid of activity. It organizes the day's events and files them into storage so you can easily retrieve them later. It also catches up on housekeeping, clearing away wastes that build up during the day. The more deeply you sleep, the more effective your brain is at healing itself. Adults typically need 7 to 9 hours of sleep for maximum brain performance, but many of us don't get it. We will negatively affect your ability to remember and concentrate. It can also make you more irritable and increase the risk of anxiety and depression. In addition, going too long without sleep has similar effects to being drunk, impairing judgment and performance, increasing risk of accident and injury. Over time, a lack of adequate sleep may also risk of dementia. To ensure you're getting enough sleep, practice good sleep hygiene. Put away electronic devices an hour before bedtime. Do something relaxing. Go to bed at the same time each night. Wake up at the same time each morning. Avoid stimulants like caffeine, omega-3 or even alcohol and heavy meals before bedtime. Keep your bed quiet and dark. And try to get in at least 30 minutes of moderately intense exercise on most days to improve both and overall health. The better you sleep at night, the better your brain will function, and the better you'll feel.
Yeah. So we're talking a lot about sleep and stuff and improving sleep, but how do you do that? And how do you do it in a way that can work? So building a routine is like the first step. So thinking of like when you would like to fall asleep and when you need to wake up or when you would like to wake up. So trying to keep that as consistent as you can. Like it doesn't need to be exact, but just like within, I think it's usually like within like 30 to 45 minutes of what it typically would be, can just kind of help with getting like your body used to the routine of when it's time to sleep and when it's time to wake. That can usually help with it feeling a little bit more natural when you fall asleep. Um, but it's also helpful to build a bedtime routine. And most of us actually do this. We just don't necessarily like classify it as a bedtime routine. But just basically the stuff that you do before you're ready to like get in bed and wind down and fall asleep. So for a lot of people, it's like brushing your teeth, washing your face, putting on pajamas. Maybe it's like having a glass of water or a cup of tea or something. And like, usually it's putting your work away and all that. That's actually all part of like the bedtime routine. So if you have a routine that you do before bed each night and stuff and it's consistent, then that is also a signal to the brain that it's time to start slowing down. It's time to get ready to rest. Um, so uh, part of it is getting the routine, and then part of it is also like slowing yourself down, right? So not doing too much that demands like a lot of your mind. So for example, if you are still like thinking of like work and you're trying to like complete an assignment or something, and you decide to do that like up until you're too tired to do anything else, it might still be hard to fall asleep. And that's because your mind is like still active, even though you're tired. So finding a way to slow down and get your mind a little less active can be helpful in getting yourself like ready to sleep. Um, it's also helpful to find something that's like an enjoyable and relaxing activity. So that can be, like watching some videos or watching a show, reading a book, talking to someone. Um, again, like having like a cup of tea or something, whatever it is that like you like that is relaxing. And again, doesn't demand too much of like your brain power, can be pretty helpful. Um, Minimizing screen time, I think this is one that like gets talked about pretty commonly of like, if you're tired, like try not to have so much exposure to like the screen. A lot of people talk about it in terms of like the blue light. Um, but it's also just like another thing that keeps your mind active. However, like being realistic, I know that like screen time is what many people can find to be their relaxing activity. So it takes some playing around and stuff to see what works. I mean, just because something's a general guideline doesn't mean that like all of it applies. So just trying not to make the screen time exposure a little bit less. So maybe like not necessarily like having the screen in bed with you basically if you're watching videos on your phone and stuff, like as you're starting to feel tired, just wrapping it up and putting the phone to the side is basically like what I mean by like minimizing screen time. Also try not to like work in bed. That's another thing, is sometimes we do a lot of work in our beds because like it's just more comfortable. Um, but when we're doing that again, it can make our minds feel like it needs to be active. And so like it starts to make the your brain makes a connection of like, oh, that is where we do work. So I need to still have like, my mental, um, I just need to keep like firing. Basically, I need to keep like going, essentially, rather than I need to wind down. So it can be helpful to set up a different type of workspace. So that way you're just like not in your bed doing a lot of work. I know sometimes that can be a bit easier said than done. And so if you can't find like another workplace beyond like your bed or something, consider just not laying down like when you're doing work, or like being like lean back or anything. Instead being a little bit more upright. Sometimes that can be a bit of like a happy medium. Um, don't try to force sleep. So that might seem a little counterintuitive to the establishment of like a routine, but it's better to sleep when you're tired. Um, and that can take some playing around too, because let's say, you have to be up at like 7 in the morning, but you're not tired until like 1 in the morning. And for you, like those 6 hours are not enough sleep. So part of it is getting yourself into the routine to potentially, like, as you're practicing it, feel a little tired earlier because you're doing the same routine. But at the same time, like, you can't really make yourself go to bed. Um, so if you find that you're like tired, but it's hard to like fall asleep, for example, or like if you're asleep and then you wake up and you can't fall back asleep or something, um, try getting out of bed for about 20 minutes. And if you're in a space where like you can't necessarily like get out of your bed and move to like a different place, like let's say you share a room or something, then um, at least like consider sitting up and not like continuing to lay down and toss and turn and checking the clock and wondering like, why can't I sleep, or like calculating the time that you're losing by not sleeping, and instead going back to that like enjoyable and relaxing activity, and then try that for 20 minutes and then try laying down again, and see if you're able to like fall back asleep. Okay, and then lastly, we have like this mindfulness and this progressive muscle relaxation exercise. So we're going to walk you through like the mindfulness portion first, and then we're going to just kind of loop the mindfulness into the progressive muscle relaxation. It'll make a little more sense as we go along. So basically, to do this mindfulness, get in a comfortable position, a comfortable seat, feet on the floor, and you can close your eyes, or you can just like find a focus point, like a spot on the wall, a spot on the ground, a corner of the room, or something. Um, and just start like paying attention to your breathing. And we're gonna slow down a little bit so that way you can do that and start to notice more of your breathing. And as you're noticing your breathing, start to focus on taking full deep breaths. Sometimes what can be helpful for that is to place like a hand on like the heart and a hand on the stomach, so that you can really feel like the oxygen like coming in and expanding and contracting. You can do it in a way that feels comfortable to you, just expanding and contracting. Take a little time to feel more comfortable with that. And as you're breathing, you might notice that some thoughts start coming to mind, and that's okay. Allow the thoughts to happen. Um, Try not to give them too much of your attention and stuff. Just allow them to come into your headspace and flow right back out. And then as they're kind of flowing in and out of the headspace, you can bring your attention back to your breathing and back to the focus of Breathing in, breathing out, expanding, and contracting. We'll take a few more moments here just with the breathing portion. And as you're continuing to focus on your breathing, you're going to start to bring some awareness to different parts of your body and start to find like some ways to relax. So continue breathing, and as you're continuing your breathing, go ahead and just like bring some awareness to your feet. Feel like your feet, either with like pressing into your shoes or the ground, below you, and just like notice how that feels. Maybe move your toes a little bit if you're able to. And as you like bringing this awareness, if you can, think about like throwing your toes in. And just kind of hold it for about 5 seconds. And then release. And then similar, like bring some awareness now to like the lower half of your leg to your calves. And just kind of notice how that feels. And as you're noticing that feeling and stuff, go ahead and like, tense up through your calves. Tense up. And release. And then you can bring your awareness to like your upper thighs and how that feels for you. And again, like bringing a little attention into it. And hold. And release. And then you can continue traveling upwards. You're going to go to your stomach and bring some awareness to like how your stomach feels. And as you become more aware of that, bring it in and like, again, like contract and hold for 5 seconds. And now let's bring some awareness to your back. And just notice your back and how your back is feeling for you today. And go ahead and you can feel some tension in your back. Hold it. And release. Now you can bring awareness to your hands and to your fingers. Working like, moving your fingers around the cups with the awareness. And then when you're ready, go ahead and bring some tension in your hands, ball up into your fist, and hold that for 5 seconds. And release. And continuing to travel up from your hands to your arms. You put your arms out in front of you and just notice how your arms are feeling. And then you create some tension in your arms. It helps again to ball your hands up into your fist for 5 seconds. And release. Now let's bring your awareness back up and through to your shoulders. Notice how your shoulders are feeling. And when you're ready, if you're able, you can flex up your shoulders. And same kind of thing, continuing the travels, bring some awareness to your neck. And create some tension in your neck. And hold it. And release. And lastly, we're going to bring some attention to your face. So notice that the face is your facial features are feeling for you. And then when you're ready, scrunch up your face and kind of bring some tension into your face and hold back at 5 seconds. And release. We'll bring some awareness to your head as well. And just kind of notice the top of your head and how that feels for you. Can't really tense through there, but it is still helpful to just kind of bring some awareness. And throughout this, you will continue your breathing, and when you're ready, you'll rejoin, and you can bring your focus back to, the screen, and can open your eyes. Good. Questions, feel free to submit any questions that you have regarding this topic. If you're interested or curious about some of the research that helped inform this presentation, here are some references. And some information just regarding the counseling center. So during the school year in the fall and spring, we're open Mondays through Thursdays from 8 to 6:30, and then Fridays from 8 to 4:30. In the summer, we're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 4 p.m. Or 4:30 p.m. The sessions, you have 6 sessions per semester. You need to be enrolled full time for those. For services in the summer, you need to be registered for at least 1 credit hour. If you're interested in services, we have walk-in hours, and they can also be virtual if that is more accessible for you. That's Monday through Fridays from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And our services include individual counseling, group counseling, couples counseling, the relaxation zone, and outreach. Similar like what this is. So if you have any interest in the types of counseling that we have here, I encourage you to check the website. You can also utilize those walk-in services for the relaxation zone. There are many relaxing self-care activities in there. So neck massages, massage chairs, and different relaxing and mindful activities that you can do in that space. It's a quiet space. We also have an oasis room if the relaxation zone is inaccessible, or if you would like just a one-person private space. For outreach, you can find places to request an outreach presentation, also listed on our website as well. And lastly, here is the feedback survey code. You can scan this QR code, or you can use this URL. Presentation title is Don't Sleep on Stress, and I'm Brianna Sandwich, and thank you for having me for this presentation.